Elias Vance had learned to become invisible. It was not a difficult thing to do. He was human, after all. In a galaxy filled with species who had conquered stars while humanity was still learning to make fire, being human meant being small, being forgettable, being nothing. He worked as a junior attaché for Earth's diplomatic mission on Concord Station. The station was massive, a city floating in space where 100 different species came together to talk, to argue, to make deals that decided the fate of worlds. Elias had been there for 3 years. In that time, he had attended over 2,000 meetings. He had shaken hands with admirals and ambassadors. He had smiled at jokes made at humanity's expense, and nobody remembered his name. This suited Elias perfectly. The Vorthani were the worst. They were tall creatures, nearly 3 meters high, with skin like polished stone and eyes that glowed with inner fire. They had ruled their corner of the galaxy for 10,000 years. Their fleets were legendary, their warriors were feared, and their diplomats treated humans the way humans might treat insects. "The human is speaking," Ambassador Thesrak said during one council meeting. His voice was like grinding rocks. "How amusing. Does it wish to share recipes for cooked grain? I hear their species is quite good at agriculture." The chamber laughed. Representatives from a dozen species found this very funny. Elias smiled politely. He closed his datapad. He sat back down. Inside, he felt nothing. He had stopped feeling anger long ago. Anger was useless. Anger made you loud. Elias had learned that quiet people heard things that loud people missed, so he listened. He listened when Vorthani officers bragged about their new weapons during diplomatic dinners. He listened when their engineers complained about supply problems in the hallways. He listened when their admirals argued about fleet positions, thinking no one important was nearby. Elias was never important, so Elias was always nearby. He learned their language first, then their customs, then their politics. He discovered that Supreme Admiral Thesrak, the most powerful military leader in the hegemony, hated his own government. He learned that Thesrak believed the Vorthani had grown weak and soft. He learned that Thesrak dreamed of conquest, of glory, of returning his people to their ancient warrior ways. Elias wrote all of this in his reports. He sent them to Earth every week. The reports were received. They were acknowledged. They were filed away and forgotten. Nobody listened to the quiet human. The Krell were different from the Vorthani, but they treated humans the same way. They were smaller, quicker, with scales that shifted color based on their moods. They had been rivals of the Vorthani for centuries. They should have been natural allies for humanity. But when Elias tried to warn them about Vorthani fleet movements, the Krell ambassador simply laughed. "Little human," he said, his scales turning the orange color of amusement. "You worry too much. The Vorthani would never risk open war. They know we would destroy them." "With respect," Elias said carefully. "The intelligence suggests." "Intelligence?" The ambassador's scales shifted to yellow, the color of disbelief. "What would humans know about intelligence? Your species has been in space for 200 years. We have been sailing the stars for 20,000. Go back to your little corner of the galaxy, human. Let the adults handle important matters." Elias smiled politely. He thanked the ambassador for his time. He left. That night, he opened a communication channel that did not officially exist. "They won't listen," he said into the darkness of his quarters. "None of them will listen." A voice came back, distorted and anonymous. "Did you expect them to?" "No," Elias admitted. "But I had to try. For the record won't matter when the shooting starts." "No," Elias agreed. "It won't." He ended the call and sat alone in the dark for a long time. The next morning, he went back to work. He attended meetings. He took notes. He smiled politely when the Vorthani made jokes about human weakness. He smiled politely when the Krill dismissed human concerns. He smiled politely when representatives from a dozen species talked about humanity like they were children who had wandered into an adult conversation. And he kept listening. He noticed that Vorthani supply ships were moving toward the periphery world's 17 independent systems that sat between the major powers. He noticed that Vorthani training exercises were positioning warships along neutral trade routes. He noticed that Thesrak had stopped attending diplomatic functions, which meant he was busy with something more important. Elias knew what was coming. He had known for months. He filed one final report to Earth. This one was different from the others. It contained everything he had learned, everything he had observed, everything he had pieced together from 3 years of being invisible. It also contained a request. The response came 2 days later. It was short, it was coded, and it changed everything. Request approved. Assets are yours to command. Good hunting. Elias read the message 3 times. Then he deleted it. He went to the next council meeting. He sat in his usual seat. He took his usual notes. When Ambassador Thesrak made another joke about human cooking, Elias laughed along with everyone else. But this time, his smile was real. The Vorthani had spent 3 years ignoring the quiet human in the corner. They had never wondered what he was doing. They had never asked what he was thinking. They had never considered that someone so small could be dangerous. They would learn. They would all learn. But not today. Today, Elias would be patient. Today, Elias would be quiet. Today, Elias would smile and nod and take his notes like the harmless little human everyone believed him to be. The storm was coming. But storms could wait. Elias Vance had learned many things during his time on Concord Station. But the most important lesson was this. The galaxy did not fear humans, because the galaxy did not see humans. And there was nothing more dangerous than an enemy you could not see. The Vorthani came without warning. 800 warships translated into the periphery in a single wave. They appeared like angry stars, their weapons already hot, their crews hungry for battle. There was no declaration of war. There was no ultimatum. There was only fire and death and the screaming of millions. Thesrak had planned his invasion well. The first targets were communication stations. Without them, the periphery worlds could not call for help. The second targets were defense platforms. Without them, the periphery worlds could not fight back. The third targets were everything else. 17 worlds. 72 hours. It was the fastest conquest in galactic history. The Galactic Concord responded exactly as Elias had predicted. They held emergency meetings. They gave angry speeches. They condemned the invasion with the strongest possible language. And then they did nothing. The Krell refused to intervene. They had old grudges with the periphery worlds, disputes over mining rights and trade routes that stretched back centuries. Why should Krell soldiers die for people who had cheated them? The Thessian Combine declared strategic neutrality. This was a polite way of saying they were afraid. The Vorthani fleet was enormous. The Thessians did not want to be next. The Orvathi Syndicate saw opportunity. War meant chaos. Chaos meant profit. Their merchants were already selling weapons to both sides. And Earth? Earth sent humanitarian aid. Earth made diplomatic protests. Earth pulled its few ships back to defend the home system. On the surface, humanity looked weak, afraid. Exactly as expected. But Elias Vance was no longer on Concord Station. He had disappeared 3 days before the invasion began. His quarters were empty. His files were deleted. The few people who remembered him assumed he had been recalled to Earth. Nobody thought about him twice. This was a mistake. The first sign of trouble came on the 4th day of the invasion. A Vorthani supply depot exploded. The official report blamed faulty equipment. The depot held enough fuel to power a dreadnought for a year. It was gone in seconds. On the 5th day, navigation beacons in 3 systems began broadcasting wrong coordinates. A Vorthani convoy followed those coordinates. They flew directly into an asteroid field. 12 ships were destroyed before they realized something was wrong. On the 6th day, a Vorthani admiral received intelligence about a Krell ambush fleet waiting in a nearby system. The intelligence was detailed. It was convincing. It was completely false. The admiral repositioned his forces to counter the threat. While they were out of position, resistance fighters struck his supply lines. Supreme Admiral Thesrak was furious. He ordered investigations. He executed officers for incompetence. He blamed spies within his own government. He never thought about the quiet human who had spent 3 years memorizing his language, studying his tactics, learning the names of his officers and the weaknesses of his ships. Elias watched from the shadows. He was not on Concord Station anymore. He was not on Earth. He was in a place that did not exist on any map, a derelict station floating in unclaimed space, and he was not alone. The convoy diversion worked, said a voice behind him. It belonged to Kira Thesson, a Thessian engineer who had spent 20 years being denied promotion because her family had low social standing. She had designed half the navigation systems that the Vorthani now relied upon. She knew exactly how to break them. The Admiral is repositioning his Eastern Fleet, said another voice. This one belonged to Vren, a Krell defector who had tried for years to warn his government about Vorthani aggression. They had called him paranoid. They had called him a warmonger. They had stripped him of his rank and sent him away in disgrace. Now he fed his former enemies false intelligence, and they believed every word. And the supply depot? Elias asked. Gone. This voice belonged to Malith, an Orvathi data trader who had been cheated by Thesrak's family in a business deal years ago. The Orvathi never forgot a debt, and they never forgave a betrayal. Malith had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. They called themselves the Quiet Ones. They had no fleet. They had no army. They had no official existence. What they had was something better. They had access. Kira could reach navigation systems. Vren could reach military networks. Maleth could reach financial records and supply chains. And Elias could reach everything else. 3 years of being invisible had given him connections throughout the galaxy, disgruntled officers who wanted revenge, overlooked technicians who wanted respect, forgotten analysts who wanted to matter. The galaxy was full of quiet people. Elias had found them all. Thesrak is getting frustrated, Vren reported, studying the intercepted communications on his screen. He thinks there are traitors in his high command. Good, Elias said. Let him chase ghosts. While he is looking inward, we will keep striking from the outside. He will figure it out eventually, Kira warned. Yes, Elias agreed, but not before we are ready. He pulled up a holographic map of the galaxy. The Vorthani fleet was marked in red. Earth's territory was marked in blue. The distance between them looked vast. It looked safe. It was neither. Thesrak wants to be a legend, Elias said quietly. He conquered the periphery in 3 days, but that is not enough for him. He wants to be remembered forever. He wants to do something no Vorthani has ever done. Earth, Vren said, understanding. Earth, Elias confirmed. He is going to attack humanity. He is going to try to destroy us before we become a threat. Can we stop him? Maleth asked. Elias smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who had been planning for this moment for a very long time. No, he said. We are not going to stop him. We are going to let him come. We are going to make him think that victory is certain, that humanity is weak, that one quick strike will end us forever. And then? Kira asked. Elias turned back to the map. He looked at Earth, that small blue dot so far from the center of galactic power. And then, he said, we are going to show them what happens when you ignore the quiet ones. The trap was being built, piece by piece, day by day. And Thesrak, in all his arrogance, was walking right into it. The information reached Supreme Admiral Thesrak on a cold morning, delivered by his most trusted spy. Earth was vulnerable. The reports were detailed. Humanity's fleet was small, barely 300 ships. Most were outdated, built with technology that other species had abandoned centuries ago. Their defense stations were spread thin, concentrated around Earth and a few colony worlds. Their military budget was a joke compared to real powers. One decisive strike would end the human threat forever. Thesrak read the reports 3 times. Each time, his stone-like face grew more satisfied. This was exactly what he had been waiting for. The periphery conquest had been glorious, but it was only the beginning. History remembered those who did great things. History remembered those who shaped the galaxy. History would remember Thesrak as the admiral who eliminated humanity before they could become a problem. He did not know that every report on his desk had been written by Elias Vance. In the derelict station, Elias worked without sleep. The final phase of his plan was the most delicate. Everything depended on Thesrak believing what he wanted to believe. Fortunately, arrogant people always believed what they wanted to believe. It was their greatest weakness. The fleet numbers are accurate, Kira said, reviewing the false intelligence they had planted. Earth really does have only 300 combat ships. The locations of the defense stations are accurate too, Vren added. If Thesrak checks, he will find nothing wrong with our information. That is the key, Elias explained. Good lies are built on truth. We did not tell him Earth was weak. We let him see that Earth was weak. There is a difference. But Earth is weak, Maleth pointed out. 300 ships against 1,000. The numbers do not lie. Elias smiled, that quiet smile that his team had learned to recognize. It meant he knew something they did not. Numbers only tell part of the story, he said. For decades, humanity had played a careful game. On the surface, they were exactly what the galaxy expected. Young, primitive, struggling to catch up with older civilizations. Their official fleet was small. Their official military budget was modest. Their official technology was generations behind. But humans had learned long ago that survival sometimes meant hiding your true strength. Deep in the asteroid belts of Sol, hidden facilities had been building ships for 50 years. Not exploration vessels, not cargo haulers, warships. Ships designed by a species that had spent its entire history fighting wars against itself. Ships armed with weapons that human engineers had developed in secret, using principles that alien scientists had dismissed as impossible. The Vorthani believed that humanity was weak because humanity had allowed them to believe it. Every diplomatic mission, every trade negotiation, every cultural exchange had reinforced the same message. Humans were not a threat. Humans were harmless. Humans were too busy trying to survive to be dangerous. It was the greatest deception in galactic history. And it had taken generations to build. The ships are only part of the plan, Elias continued. Thesrak could still win with superior numbers, even against our hidden fleet. That is why we need something else. He pulled up a schematic on the main display. It showed the internal architecture of a Vorthani dreadnought, every system labeled in precise detail. For 3 years, I watched Vorthani engineers maintain their ships at Concord Station. I listened to their complaints. I learned their procedures. And I discovered something interesting. He highlighted a section of the schematic. It was the central computer core, the brain that controlled everything from navigation to weapons to life support. The Vorthani have not updated their core software in 200 years. They believe it is perfect. They believe it cannot be improved. They believe it cannot be broken. Can it? Vren asked, leaning forward with interest. Everything can be broken, Elias said. You just need to find the right crack. The Quiet Ones had spent months preparing. Every routine software update that Vorthani ships received contained hidden code, sleeping in the depths of their systems. Every maintenance drone that serviced their vessels carried tiny modifications. Every diplomatic gift from friendly species included components that were not quite what they appeared to be. The code did nothing. It sat dormant, invisible, waiting, until Elias told it to wake up. When Thesrak's fleet enters the Sol system, we activate the code, Elias explained. Navigation fails. Targeting fails. Communication fails. Their ships become blind, deaf, and confused. They will still have weapons, Kira pointed out. They will still have warriors. Yes, Elias agreed. But a warrior who cannot see his enemy is just a target. And 300 human ships, fighting together, knowing exactly where to strike. He did not need to finish the sentence. They all understood. There is one more element, Elias said. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. Thesrak needs to hear from me directly. He needs to know who did this to him. He needs to understand. Why? Malith asked. Revenge? Elias shook his head. No, not revenge. A message. He turned to face his team. These were people who had been ignored, dismissed, forgotten by the galaxy. They had been told they did not matter. They had been told they were nothing. And yet here they were, about to change history. The galaxy believes that power comes from fleets and armies, Elias said. They believe that the loud ones, the proud ones, the ones who beat their chests and roar their strength, they believe those are the ones to fear. They are wrong. He thought about every insult he had endured, every laugh at humanity's expense, every time someone had looked through him like he was not there. The Quiet Ones hear everything. The Quiet Ones learn everything. The Quiet Ones are everywhere, in every system, in every government, in every species. And the galaxy needs to know that ignoring us is the most dangerous mistake they can make. A message came through on the main display. Thesrak had given the order. The Vorthani fleet was mobilizing. 1,200 ships, the largest invasion force in a century, were preparing to attack Earth. Elias watched the numbers scroll across the screen. 1,200 ships, warriors who had conquered the stars while humans were still living in caves. Technology that should have been impossible to defeat. He felt no fear. He had stopped feeling fear years ago. Around the same time he stopped feeling anger. Both emotions were useless. Both emotions made you weak. What Elias felt was patience. The same patience that had carried him through 3 years of humiliation. The same patience that had built this network, piece by piece, person by person, the same patience that humans had cultivated for generations, hiding their strength, waiting for the right moment. The moment was almost here. Send the final signal, Elias said. Tell Earth to prepare. The Vorthani are coming. He looked at the map one last time. The red markers of the Vorthani fleet were beginning to move, a tide of destruction sweeping toward humanity's home. Let them come, Elias whispered. We are ready. The Vorthani fleet arrived in Seoul like a storm of iron and fire. 1,200 warships translated into human space, their weapons already charged, their crews ready for glory. Supreme Admiral Thesrak stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and smiled as Earth appeared on his view screen. Such a small world. Such a fragile species. This would be easier than the periphery. Begin the assault, Thesrak commanded. His voice echoed across every ship in the fleet. Let nothing survive. The Vorthani surged forward, and then everything went wrong. The first sign was the navigation displays. Numbers began to flicker, coordinates shifting randomly across screens. Officers shouted in confusion. Where was the enemy fleet? The sensors showed contacts everywhere, then nowhere, then everywhere again. What is happening? Thesrak demanded. Before anyone could answer, the targeting systems failed. Weapons that had been locked onto human defense stations suddenly pointed at empty space. Gunners tried to correct, but their computers refused to respond. Then the communications died. The Eternal Dominion went silent. Thesrak could see his fleet through the viewports. 1,200 ships, spread across millions of kilometers of space, but he could not reach them. No orders, no coordination, no control. In the chaos, 3 Vorthani dreadnoughts collided. Their collision avoidance systems reported clear space where Allied vessels floated. The explosions lit up the void like small suns, and through the fire, the human fleet emerged. They were not the primitive ships that Thesrak had expected. These vessels were sleek and deadly, built for one purpose: war. They moved in perfect formation, their weapons already firing, their captains knowing exactly where to strike. 300 ships against 1,200. But 1,200 ships that could not see, could not communicate, could not coordinate. They were not an army anymore. They were targets. Thesrak watched in horror as his fleet began to die. A voice crackled through his command channel. It should have been impossible. The communications were dead. Nothing should have been able to reach him. But somehow, someone had found a way. Good morning, Supreme Admiral. Thesrak recognized the voice. It took him a moment. He had heard it so rarely, and never paid attention when he did. But yes, he knew this voice. The human, he whispered. The attaché. Elias Vance, the voice confirmed. I am glad you remember me. Most people do not. That has always been my greatest advantage. How? Thesrak demanded. How is this possible? You laughed at me once, Elias said calmly. You asked if I wanted to share recipes for cooked grain. Do you remember that? Thesrak remembered. It had been a good joke. Everyone had laughed. Here is something else that humans learned from cooking, Admiral. Patience. We learned to plant seeds and wait for them to grow. We learned to let things simmer until they were ready. We learned that the best meals take time. Outside, the battle raged. Human ships cut through the confused Vorthani fleet like predators through wounded prey. Without coordination, the Vorthani could not mount a defense. Without targeting, they could not fight back. Without communication, they could not retreat. 3 years. Elias continued. I spent 3 years on Concord Station, listening, learning, building a network of people like me, people who had been ignored, dismissed, forgotten. We are everywhere, Admiral. In every species, in every government, in every fleet. You never noticed us because you never thought we mattered. Thesrak slammed his fist against his command console. You cannot defeat us. Even without our systems, we are warriors. We will fight. Yes, Elias agreed. You will fight. And you will die. Because there is something you do not understand about humans, Admiral. Something that none of you have ever understood. On the view screen, a Vorthani battlecruiser exploded as human missiles found its reactor core. Then another. Then another. We are not the young species you think we are. We did not climb out of the caves yesterday. We have been fighting wars for 10,000 years against each other. We learned things in those wars. We learned how to kill. We learned how to survive. And we learned the most important lesson of all. What lesson? Thesrak asked through clenched teeth. That the enemy you underestimate is the enemy who destroys you. The Eternal Dominion shuddered as something struck its shields. Human ships were closing in now, sensing weakness, moving for the kill. Your fleet is finished, Elias said. You can surrender and save your remaining crews, or you can die with them. The choice is yours. Thesrak looked at his tactical display, useless, corrupted, showing nothing but chaos. He looked at his officers, confused, afraid, unable to help. He looked out the viewport at his fleet burning, scattered, broken beyond repair. For the first time in his long life, Thesrak felt something he had never felt before. Defeat. How many ships do you have? He asked quietly. Your real fleet. How many? 300, Elias answered. The same 300 that your intelligence reported. The same 300 that you dismissed as insignificant. Impossible. 300 ships could not do this. 300 ships with accurate information could. 300 ships whose crews knew exactly where to strike could. 300 ships fighting an enemy that could not fight back could. The Eternal Dominion shook again. Warnings flashed across every console. Hull breaches. System failures. Reactor instability. You beat us with information. Thesrak realized. Not weapons. Information. Information is the greatest weapon, Elias said. And the quiet ones always have the best information. Because we listen. Because we watch. Because we remember everything. A human destroyer appeared directly ahead of the Eternal Dominion. Its weapons locked onto the bridge. Thesrak could see its name painted on the hull. Silent victory. Last chance, Admiral, Elias said. Surrender, and your crews live. Your pride is not worth their lives. Thesrak closed his eyes. He thought about glory. He thought about legend. He thought about being remembered forever. Then he thought about the thousands of warriors under his command who would die because he had ignored a quiet human in a diplomatic meeting. I surrender, he said. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. A wise choice, Elias replied. Drop your shields and prepare to be boarded. And Admiral, remember this day. Remember what happens when you ignore the quiet ones. Because we will always be watching. We will always be listening. And we will always be ready. The channel went dead. Supreme Admiral Thesrak, the undying, conqueror of the periphery, the greatest military mind of his generation, stood alone on his broken bridge and watched as human ships surrounded his flagship. The battle was over. The Vorthani had come with 1,200 ships to destroy humanity. 6 hours later, only 200 remained functional. The rest were destroyed, captured, or drifting dead in the void. And somewhere out there, a quiet human was already planning what came next. 1 year had passed since the Battle of Sol. The galaxy had changed. The Vorthani hegemony, once the most feared power in known space, had collapsed into civil war. Thesrak's generals had blamed each other for the disaster. They had fought over the ruins of their empire. They had torn each other apart while the rest of the galaxy watched. Thesrak himself was dead. His own officers had executed him 3 months after the defeat. They called him a failure. They called him a fool. They called him the admiral who had lost 1,000 ships to a species of primitives. They never understood what had really happened. The periphery worlds were free again. The species who had been conquered and enslaved had rebuilt their governments, their stations, their lives. They remembered who had helped them. They remembered who had abandoned them. And they remembered who had been ignored. Humanity's seat on the Galactic Concord Security Council had been approved unanimously. Even the Krell had voted in favor. Even the Thessians. Even the Orvathi. Nobody wanted to be on the wrong side of the species that had humiliated the Vorthani. Elias Vance attended the ceremony. He stood in the back of the great chamber, watching as Earth's new ambassador gave speeches about peace and cooperation and shared futures. The ambassador was young and bright and full of hope. She talked about building bridges between species. She talked about learning from the past. She talked about a galaxy where everyone was equal. Elias listened politely. He did not believe a word of it. The galaxy would never change. The strong would always look down on the weak. The loud would always ignore the quiet. The powerful would always assume their power made them right. But that was fine. Elias had learned to work with the galaxy as it was, not as he wished it could be. After the ceremony, the delegates mingled in the reception hall. Drinks were served. Hands were shaken. Deals were made in quiet corners. Business as usual for Concord Station. A Corel ambassador approached Elias. He was older now. His scales faded with age, but Elias recognized him. This was the same ambassador who had laughed about human cooking 3 years ago. The same one who had told Elias to let the adults handle important matters. Attaché Vance, the ambassador said carefully. His scales were gray, the color of respect. I hoped I might speak with you. Of course, ambassador. Elias smiled politely. It was the same smile he had always worn. We misjudged your species, the Krill said. We thought you were less than you are. We were wrong. Many species made that mistake, Elias replied. The Vorthani made it worst of all. Yes, the ambassador hesitated, his scales flickering through several colors before settling back to gray. I must ask, the things that happened, the sabotage, the false intelligence, the chaos that destroyed Thesrak's fleet, was that you? Was it all you? Elias did not answer immediately. He looked around the reception hall, at the hundreds of delegates from dozens of species. So many powerful people, so many important people, so many people who had never noticed the quiet human taking notes in the corner. Not just me, he finally said. There are quiet ones in every species, ambassador. People who are ignored, people who are dismissed, people who are told they do not matter. I simply helped them find each other. The Corel's scales shifted to pale blue, the color of fear. They are still out there? Your network? Elias smiled again. The galaxy is very large, ambassador, and there are always people being ignored. He excused himself politely and walked away. The truth was simpler than the Krill imagined. The quiet ones had not disbanded after the war. If anything, they had grown. Kira had returned to Thessian space, but she still monitored navigation systems across the galaxy. Vren had been welcomed back by the Krill government, now a hero instead of a disgrace, but his first loyalty remained to the network. Malith had expanded her information trading business, and every piece of data she gathered was shared with those who needed it most. And every day, new members joined. Engineers who had been passed over for promotion, analysts whose warnings had been ignored, soldiers who had seen their reports buried by superior officers. The galaxy was full of people who knew things, saw things, understood things, and were never listened to. Elias gave them a place where they would be heard. A young human woman approached him near the exit. She was new to the diplomatic corps. Still wide-eyed and eager, she reminded Elias of himself, 3 years ago, before he had learned how the galaxy really worked. Excuse me, sir, she said nervously. I just wanted to say what you did. It was incredible. You saved Earth. You saved everyone. Elias studied her face. Young, smart, quiet, the kind of person that powerful aliens would overlook without a second thought. What is your name? He asked. Mei Lin, sir. I am the new junior attaché for the Thessian desk. A difficult assignment. The Thessians do not respect humans much. No, sir. She lowered her eyes. They barely acknowledge me. Most days, I feel invisible. Elias nodded slowly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small card. It had no name on it, no title, no official markings, just a communication frequency. Invisible can be powerful, he said, pressing the card into her hand. If you ever feel like no one is listening, use this. There are people who want to hear what you have to say. Mei Lin looked at the card, then back at Elias. Understanding began to dawn in her eyes. The quiet ones, she whispered. They are real. I thought they were just a legend. The best secrets are the ones that everyone knows but nobody believes. Elias smiled one last time. Welcome to the network, Mei Lin. We have a lot of work to do. He left the reception hall and walked out onto the observation deck of Concord Station. Through the vast windows, he could see ships from 100 different species coming and going. The galaxy continued to turn. Powers rose and fell. Species fought and traded and schemed against each other. And in the shadows, the quiet ones watched. They were everywhere now. In every government, in every military, in every corporation and organization and power structure across known space. They did not seek glory. They did not want power. They simply wanted to be heard. And they had learned the most important lesson that Elias Vance could teach them. Patience. The galaxy had ignored humanity for 200 years. It had taken only 6 hours to show them the cost of that mistake. But the lesson would not last. It never did. Soon, some other species would grow arrogant. Some other admiral would dismiss human warnings. Some other ambassador would laugh at human concerns. When that happened, the quiet ones would be ready. Elias pulled out his datapad and began to take notes. There was a new crisis brewing in the Orvathi Syndicate. Trade disputes, political tensions, the usual noise that preceded larger problems. Most people ignored it. Most people thought it did not matter. Elias Vance knew better. He had learned that the galaxy never changed. The powerful always underestimated the weak. The loud always ignored the quiet. And the quiet ones always won in the end, because they were patient, because they were everywhere, and because they never, ever forgot.